For this video, we're going to show you how to finish setting up your hand wrapper and to start and stop your guide wraps. First of all, you're going to need the hand wrapper that we assembled. The parts are the knob, the fender washer, the spacer, the smaller washer, and the thread cap. Then we're going to use the thread toolkit that you received in your setup, which is your snips, your pick, and your burnishing tool, your China marker, razor blade, and the guides that we prepped earlier on. So before we get going too far, I want to cut off about a foot of thread. We're going to cut this in half, and we're going to use these for what we call pull-throughs. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a couple of these so I have them for a little later on. Just lay them down in front of me. Now, when we mount the thread, we want the thread feeding out of the bottom. So we put the thread spool on. I'm going to put the cap. The fender washer. And we have the spacer, the small washer, and the knob. These knobs are much easier than the old T-bolts that we used to, or the wing nuts that we used to use. They do have a nylock washer inside of them, but they're much easier to turn. I'm going to lock this down to where it just starts to put tension on it. Okay, so I'm going to pull the thread out. Again, we've got it coming out from underneath. We're pulling it out through the first hook in here. Then we pull it up through the tip top, down through the center one here, and across to the hook on the slider. Now what we want to do, tension-wise, is we want this tension rod pointing right at our chest. So I'm going to tighten it until it pulls. See, it's gone just a little past where we want it. We want it, when it releases, we want it pointing right at our chest. There we go, just like that. So I'm going to take off the excess thread here. And we're going to mount our rod blank on here. You've got two bands. You want to put them on. They'll hold the rod blank in place, and they'll also put some tension on the rod blank so that it doesn't spin and allow the thread to come loose during this process. You don't really need the other support at this point. Usually on the second or third guide you will. So we're rotating the rod blank to the top. You can see here the hoods are facing up. I'm placing my guide foot underneath the tubing. And I want the ring to line up with the mark on the rod blank. Put the guide tubing in the center of the foot. Then when we start our wrapping process, we're going to come over the front. I recommend starting about 1/4 of an inch or so in front of the tip of the guide foot. This is all personal preference depending on how much thread work you want to show. We wrap it around once and twice and bring it past behind the rod blank. Then lift our running thread over the top of the other two threads to lock them down. At that point, we can start wrapping over the beginning. Now make sure you use your burnishing tool here. hold my burnishing tool in place, start the wrap. I like to get a nice clear or clean thread wrap there. After we've wrapped over that tag end 5 or 6 times, we're going to snip it off and then continue wrapping. As we approach the tip of the guide foot, this is going to be where you might struggle, and you're going to find out whether you did a good enough job filing those guide feet. Ideally, you want that thread to walk right up the guide foot. Sometimes we have to help it out a little bit here. Use your burnishing tool. Try not to touch your thread too much with your hands. The oil off your hands will get on the thread, and it can cause you problems with the finish further down the road. There we go. And we're going to continue wrapping right up to the point where we get to the band. Take a razor blade and just snip the band. It pops out of place. And we continue to wrap. So one thing that's nice about this reverse tension rod is that if you over wrap or you get a gap in there, you can back it up and go 3 or 4 wraps and then resume. So we get about 10 or 12 wraps from the end where we're going to stop. We're going to insert one of the loops that we created. This is our pull through. You want the loop to face in the direction that you're wrapping and on the opposite side of the guide foot. Pull it up on the top, just like that. You just continue to wrap over the top of it. Now typically you want to wrap right to the point where your guide frame goes from the foot of the guide to the leg of the guide. Okay, we're almost to the end of our guide wrap. You want to make sure you avoid those gaps in your thread. Continue to burnish it as you get close to the end. There we go. And a lot of those gaps will go away when you pull your thread through. There we go, right there. Now this process, where we pull our thread through, you're going to put your finger on the back of the rod, just like this. Relieve the tension on the rod, so you've got slack thread. Snip it. Take the end of the thread, pass it through the loop, hold that in place, and grab the 2 ends of the pull through and pull that thread underneath. Sometimes it'll break off, which it just did right there. What happened though is it broke the thread off, so it pulled it underneath, which is fine. Normally, you would have pulled that thread all the way through and then snipped it off. That thread is complete. You can take your burnishing tool. You want to square up your ends and move on to the next guide.